I mean, it's inconceivable for any Western democracy to subsist even for 10 years more if we didn't have, through progressive taxation, a steady transfer of resources from rich people to poor.
And we are all living in history. We are all living in a time of change. And the first thing we must understand is this change.
Imagine that you take the material in one galaxy, the material in another galaxy, neighboring galaxies, and you spread it all into a kind of uniform distribution of particles everywhere throughout space.
I only wish I could go back to Gombe and tell the chimps how interested you all are. Well, we have 1 short hour.
Economists imagine all human beings are just money-making machines, nothing else. All they do in their lifetime make money. And that's the goal of their life. That doesn't sound like a human.
And now I can stand here and say to you, everything is possible, and I mean it.
Good evening. Bienvenue. My name is Nala Ayad. I'm the host of Ideas on CBC Radio 1. And I'm really honored to be your MC tonight for this special event, the 70th Annual Beatty Lecture at McGill University. We now broadcast the Beatty Lecture on Ideas every year, as well as my conversation with the lecturer. And it's really wonderful to be able to do that again this year for this special event to our listeners across the country and around the world. The Beatty Lectures began in 1954. Ideas, meanwhile, has been on the air every weekday evening since 1965. That was before I was born. It's really remarkable that it took us until 2021 to finally cement the partnership between us, but we got there in the end, and I'm very glad and grateful for it. All to say, I should tell you that we are recording tonight's proceedings for broadcast, and I know that there are many of us who nurture a deep fear of having our cell phone go off loudly in a crowded theater. The image of all the eyes turning towards you as you're fumbling to try to turn it off, the fear is visceral, and it can only be compounded by imagining the moment being broadcast to hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of radio listeners around the world. So now is a wonderful moment to double check that your device is not going to do that to you. Unusually, you'll see that there are 2 Beatty lecturers tonight, an artist and a scientist. They are the winners of the 2024 World Cultural Council Awards, being celebrated in Canada this year. We're going to hear from them both in a moment, but first, I'd like to welcome to the stage McGill's president and vice chancellor, which might sound like 2 people, but it's actually the one and only Deep Sani.
Thank you very much, Nala, and bonsoir à toutes et à tous. What a pleasure it is to have you here. I want to begin by acknowledging that McGill University is on land which has long served as a site of meetings and exchange among indigenous peoples, including Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse indigenous peoples whose presence marks this territory on which peoples of the world now gather. May I say to all the McGill alumni joining tonight in this lead up to the McGill's homecoming celebrations later this weekend, bienvenue chez vous, welcome home. This is always a very special evening at McGill, and I am so glad that you can join us today. Established as an endowed lecture with an international focus in 1954, I just realized today that Beatty Lecture and I were born in the same year. The Beatty Lecture was named in honor of McGill's former Chancellor, Sir Edward Beatty. As the video that you just watched attests, over the span of 70 years, the Beatty has become one of Canada's most important public lectures. Some of the world's greatest thinkers and the most renowned change makers have stood at Beatty podium. A wonderfully diverse group, they are united by one common thread: their unshakable dedication to fostering dialogue, expanding knowledge, and making the world a better place for all of us. I know that our speakers tonight will be no exception. We have the special honor to hear from two remarkable individuals: author, playwright, and filmmaker Cónal Creedon, and evolutionary biologist Eske Willerslev. This year, the Beatty Lecture is presented in partnership with the World Cultural Council. At a ceremony tomorrow, the World Cultural Council will bestow the 2024 Leonardo da Vinci World Award of Arts on Mr. Creedon and the 2024 Albert Einstein World Award of Science will be bestowed upon Professor Willerslev. My congratulations to both of these remarkable individuals. It is my pleasure to also warmly welcome the members of the World Cultural Council who have traveled to Montreal and McGill for this occasion from several places far and away, and who are joining us here tonight. It is now my pleasure to invite to the stage Omar Yaghi, James Neely Tretter Chair, Professor of Chemistry at the University of California, Berkeley, to introduce our first speaker. Professor Yaghi is representing Professor Sir Fraser Stoddart, President of the World Cultural Council.
Good evening. I'd like to read a statement on behalf of Sir Fraser Stoddart, the President of the World Cultural Council. Dear President Deep Saini, Provost Christopher Manfredi, dear colleagues and friends, it's a great pleasure for the World Cultural Council to celebrate the 39th award ceremony at McGill University, one of the leading seats of learning in Canadian and indeed in the world. We are delighted to enhance our relations with such institutions through a higher event that underlies our common values and joint effort directed towards the benefit of humankind. These aims blend perfectly with the vision of the World Cultural Council, which seek to contribute to a culture which brings the inhabitants of this planet towards a better world, in which all differences are respected. A culture that promotes progress and fulfills our life with enriched attainments. I am well aware of the historical dimension of your university, which was founded over 200 years ago when McGill College was granted a royal charter as an institution of higher learning. I was delighted to be invited to the award ceremony, but I am unfortunately unable to attend. I would nonetheless like to thank you again for hosting this event. I would like to express my gratitude to the university authorities and staff. I would also like to thank Aloha Communication for sponsoring the World Cultural Council social media presence. Tonight, we will recognize two outstanding role models, Professor Eske Willerslev, who has made pioneering discoveries in the field of evolutionary genetics during his highly fruitful and successful career. His work helps us to better understand the origins, interactions, and adaptation of human population groups. For this achievement, he has been selected as the winner of the Albert Einstein World Award of Science in 2024. Cónal Creedon, a novelist, short story writer, playwright, documentary filmmaker, essayist, and collaborative artist, has been awarded the Leonardo da Vinci World Award of Arts 2024. His creative work have enlightened our understanding of the human condition and constitute a significant contribution to the artistic legacy of creative expression. The two prize winners, I think, represent ideally the objectives and the aims and the aspirations of the World Cultural Council to recognize and to reward their academic achievements at the early stages of their career. We will also recognize 4 highly promising young Canadian researchers whose bold vision and hard work have set them at a young age on a path to push back boundaries in art and science. May these young scholars, all of us, for that matter, be living models of the creative intelligence and rich human qualities emerging from university campuses, not only as competent professionals, but also as exemplary citizens with a deep sense of ethics. As I said before, it would have been an enormous pleasure for me to be with you to congratulate the laureates in person, though this message I can at least send across the distance from Hong Kong, all by my wholehearted congratulations and admirations. And needless to say, I agree with every single word Sir Fraser Stoddart is expressing. Cheers, Eske, cheers, Cónal, and cheers to the young, talented special recognitions. Thank you. Now I would like to have the pleasure of introducing the Beatty Memorial Lecturer, Cónal Creedon. Distinguished President of McGill University, Professor Deep Saini, ladies and gentlemen, I have the great honor this evening of introducing our remarkable speakers for these Beatty lectures who have been selected by the interdisciplinary jury of the World Cultural Council to receive this year's awards. The 2024 World Cultural Council Leonardo da Vinci Award of Arts has been awarded to Cónal Creedon. He will address us as well as a distinguished guest for the Beatty Memorial Lecture. Cónal Creedon is an award-winning novelist, short story writer, playwright, documentary filmmaker, essayist, and collaborative artist. He is known as talented and creative storyteller who brings truth and beauty wherever he chooses to be. His creative practice has been described as an exploration of the spaghetti ball of streets in downtown Cork City, Ireland, where his family has lived and traded for over 100 years. Recently, Cónal launched on a new book, Spaghetti Ball, was published specifically to mark the event of Cónal receiving the award from the World Cultural Council. Through his essays, Cónal Creedon has received acclaim for peeling back the layers of Cork City's history and culture with insights from different periods of his life. He captures in its essence while simultaneously providing a vivid portrait as he immerses the reader into his hometown. His detailed investigation of such a tight-knit neighborhood reveals insights into the universal nature of the human condition and constitutes a significant contribution to the artistic legacy of creative expression. Professor Cónal Creedon, please.
Glasses. Just to say bonjour, Montreal. Je suis rêvé d'être ici. My French is not as fluent as my own mother tongue, the Irish language, so maybe I should say a few words on that. And Gwyn Uishle, Fáte Roibh Galéir, basically, gentle people, welcome. Just to say thank you very much for the very kind words. And I arrived to Montreal on Sunday night, and I didn't know anybody, obviously. It was my first time in Montreal. And I start to feel I'm in a room full of friends, and that's very special. The people from the World Cultural Council, we just connected really intensely and very friendly and very special, so thank you. So I'm going to say a few words. Basically, as Omar mentioned, I'm a storyteller. And in fact, that storytelling often manifests itself as writing. And, sorry, my voice isn't great there. I was chatting yesterday to people from the World Cultural Council. We were just chatting in general, and we were talking about the whole nature of success and, you know, what quantifies success. And I was thinking that, like, for me anyway, that success is never measured as, you know, book sales. It's not measured by 5-star reviews. It's not measured by seats sold at a theatre. Like, for me, I genuinely measure my research, or my success as the ability to be able to sit down and do what I love doing. And that is an amazing luxury, because very few people have that freedom, I suppose is the word, and to be able to do it without compromise. The thing is, life in general is a compromise, and like everything we do involves compromise, I guess, of some sort, and there's no doubt, but the very act of writing creates a duality in itself, in that, you know, the privacy and the isolation and that's required to, you know, to indulge creativity is sort of counterbalanced by that need that I have to socialize, and it sort of balances itself out sometimes, but sometimes not. The very practice of writing in a funny way, which means being in a room, my favorite place actually, I often describe it as being similar to being somebody who loves fishing and waking up every morning by a beautiful river with a fishing rod and be told, go fish away. Because with writing, you need no resources. All you need is a pen and a piece of paper. And I often, that whole nature of people saying, you know, an aspiring writer, I think you either write or you don't, because there's nothing to stop you doing it. It's a very simple thing to do, and if you need to do it, it becomes obsessive. But the reality is there are compromises, and the compromises are the social side of it. Things like book launches, lectures, obviously, reading tours. And I was thinking today, if I can go down a sidetrack, I remember the first reading that I ever gave, and it was about 30 years ago, and I had a book out. I had actually maybe 2 books out, and I was a few reading events, but I wouldn't read at my own readings. I guess I was shy, I suppose, or something, but I used to get actor friends of mine to read my work. And eventually I got a phone call from a library in a small village in County Cork to ask me, would I come and do a reading? And I said, I will. And it was sort of a bit of a big thing for me. So I went there, and I won't mention the name of the village, but it was a Tuesday morning, 10:30, and I arrived, and it basically was a shop front. It was like a shop unit with books. It's a library, obviously. And I came in, and the first thing, I suppose on the way there, I assumed, you know, you're thinking of things like Carnegie Hall, and you're thinking of the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl, and this is the truth, like. And so I arrive in, and there's nobody there, you know, and I started to think, okay, what am I going to do here? And 2 things, I couldn't very well leave because I had been asked to do it, and then it would look like I didn't turn up, but I didn't want to compromise the librarian by, you know, making her say, sorry, couldn't get anybody. And I didn't want to compromise myself either by saying I couldn't get anybody. So I arrived in, and I was sort of looking at the books, like A for Aardvark, and I was working my way around to, like, I suppose, Z for zoology. And the librarian was obviously saying, who is this guy? Because she would know the locals, obviously. And she said, are you okay there? And I said, I'm fine. Fine, absolutely fine. And she said, you know, can I help you? I said, but I'm just wondering, was there supposed to be a reading here this morning, right? And she said, no. And I said, oh, good. So that was me off the hook. And I thought, I'm out of here, right? And then just as I turned, she said, actually, now to mention it, there was talk of something about something, right? And I was saying, well, you just said there wasn't. And she said, yeah, but there was. And I said, I was trying to get out. And she came outside the counter. And when we got to the door of the library, the front door opened out. And there was a small elderly man there with a flat cap, and he was smoking a cigarette. And he said, so I was standing between him and the librarian, and he was sort of trying to reach beyond me, and he was saying, Mary, her name was Mary, and that's not giving too much away because most Irish people are called Mary anyway, even the men. But he says, Mary, is there supposed to be a reading here today? And I said, no, there's not. I said, I just asked her, right? And she said, God, you're getting very uppity. And I said, no, but I just asked you, and you said there wasn't, right? And she said to him, so, Jerry, why did you think there was a reading? And he said, well, it was down the post office, and somebody in the post office said there was a reading. And I was saying, Jesus, what did the post office know about anything? I said, in fairness, I said, they'd be better off like delivering the letters to me down there, telling people this. And she was saying, you're getting very odd. And I said, I'm sorry. I said, but I asked you, and you said there wasn't. And it went down this way. And as it happened, then he stood in. And as he did, there was an inside door and an outside door. The inside door, he closed it, and on the back of the door was the poster. And they said, there it is, right? And the poster was there, and it was like reading the library. I won't mention where, because we all get sued. The library, my name, and the date, right? And she said, there, I knew I saw it somewhere. But the problem was, there was a photograph of me in the middle of it, you know? And she said, show us. She said, that's you, she said. And I said, no, it's not. Like, what do you do? Like, you have to lie sometimes. And then he said, that's you, all right, he said. And I said, show us. And I said, oh, actually, maybe it is right. And she said, are you here for the reading? And I said, yeah. And now this was my first reading, and I realized it was her first reading too. And then she said, so what do you want? What do you need? And I said, well, an audience would be a great thing, right? And then she said, Jerry, will you be the audience? And he said, sure, I have nothing better to do, I may as well. And so she gave us these two seats. They were like little mushroom, like toadstools. It was in the kids' department, right? And not a department, the kids' corner, right? And so we were sitting down, and then I realized it was Jerry's first reading too, because he kept saying, what? And I was saying, can you hear me? He said, this ear is banjaxed. And I said, how's your other ear? And he said, the other ear is fine. I said, well, come over this side. So he came over here, and I was reading, and it was my first reading. I was very nervous, and it was very much a case of the cat sat on and he was saying, do you know what's going to happen next? And he was sort of second-guessing the story. And I was saying, I do. I said, I wrote the bloody thing. I know exactly how this is going to end, right? I said, there's no ambiguity in this thing. It ends. And at the end, and I was thinking, maybe he's right. I don't know how readings are supposed to be. Maybe he's right and I'm wrong. And she kept coming over saying, so lads, how's the reading going? And I was saying, best reading I was ever given anyway, to tell you the truth. And that was the truth, right? But I suppose the point I'm getting at really, because I'm trying to go in and curly tails, and I shouldn't have went off there, but three things sort of crossed my mind, and I suppose looking out here is what reminded me of that story. The first thing is that it wasn't really about the reading, and it wasn't really about literature, and it wasn't about the library, and it wasn't about... What it was actually about was about me meeting Jerry and Mary, And I realised that everything in life, everything we do, it's about people, engaging with people. We masquerade it as different things like business, commerce, politics, sport, art, whatever. But it's basically all about people meeting people. And that was the first thing that crossed my mind. Well, not the first thing. The first thing was, how do I get out of this village? But after that, the second thing was that. The next thing that crossed my mind was that, and this is sort of a personal thing, and it said, if ever you're giving a reading, you're really better off if nobody turns up than if one person turns up. Because if one person turns up, you're bunched, because they're going to witness it. And then the last thing is probably the one that stays with the longest. And it's that, I suppose I'm always very, for very respectful of audiences, because it means an awful lot to me. That day, I realised that without an audience, it's a bit, difficult. And so just to say to you people, thank you very much, because I know, first of all, that everybody has busy lives, and everybody has stuff going on, and everybody has their own issues, and to give this much of your time to what, myself and Eske are doing today is it's a huge privilege, and thank you very much for that. So I'm going to get back to and I'm going to run with this, I'll be very quick. So basically, I suppose with the writing, creativity is a big part of it, obviously. And I think for me, for true creativity, it's just personal. I mean, I don't really know about anybody else, and I really don't know anything. But for me, creativity comes from embracing ridicule, really, because I think that otherwise I find myself working sort of within the perceived parameters of the expectations of others, and it's otherwise you just have to say, look, maybe people think this is stupid, but how bad? This is what I'm doing. So it means that creative expression is incredibly self-indulgent, because you're not writing for anybody else, you're writing for yourself. And I suppose I had to ask myself, why is creativity, it's so self-indulgent, right? And yet, why is it not only tolerated, but it's actually celebrated in our culture as a thing? And it occurred to me that humans, we, as in humans, are relatively unique on a lot of fronts. But one of the ways we're unique is that we have an amazing need to entertain each other. You look at the birds of the air and the beasts of the field and the fish of the sea. They're not putting on musicals, right? And I'm sure they'd love to if they could. Like Annie, get your gun. But the point is that they're not, and I'm sure they're entertaining each other in different ways. But our need is excessive. Not only that need to entertain, but our need to be entertained is equaled by our need to entertain. And it crossed my mind that whole thing of entertaining, it permeates every aspect of life, not just film and the arts and television and all that. It goes right across. Like, for example, a very basic need, food and drink, is now entertainment. Like that was sort of stuff we used to survive, in the past. And then you go on from that, of course, and you have everything from advertising, education, politics, sport, business. There's an aspect of performance in every single thing we do, even how we dress ourselves, how we comb our hair, how we brush our teeth. It's all about presenting what I would say is a narrative. And I suppose it comes back to me being a storyteller, ultimately. And because I've met Professor Eske, another friend I've met since Sunday, and delighted I've met him, but he has inspired me because, you'll hear him speak in a minute, but he has spent a huge amount of his time researching and finding basically the oldest traces of DNA. And, from talking to him, I realized that many scientists go through their whole life with a question and never finding an answer. I mean, that's some career path, I mean, when does the time come that you rephrase the question and say, okay, we'll do this instead? But it made me think, having, us chatting over the last few days, that the origins of storytelling, and could I find the DNA of storytelling, the oldest DNA? And it defeated me, I tell you the truth. But I mean, that's it. I'm not at it long enough. I only started yesterday, right? It takes a while, doesn't it? But it seems to me, here's the thing, that humans, in our uniqueness, not only do we need to be entertained and entertain, but we also have another unique aspect, and that is that we're aware of our own mortality. And I think that maybe the need to entertain and awareness of our own mortality could be sort of linked, because it's about creating enough white noise to distract us from, take our mind off the inevitability of our own mortality. Ever since humans became aware of our own mortality, we've become obsessed by the notion of immortality. And most belief systems, and I'm not talking about established religions, I'm talking about cultural belief systems, immortality is a keystone in it. You look at the warrior culture, even in my own Irish culture, people who, it sounds like a cliche, but who die for Ireland, they reach a level that's higher than just people who just die in general. And there are monuments, and it's a very genuine belief, this sense that you can reach a higher level of, for the want of a better word, of death, of mortality. But it's sort of, there is a Celtic belief, and I'm sure it goes across a lot of different cultures, really, right? But it's that no one truly dies until their name is spoken for the last time. And what's interesting about that concept is that, when you look at how we etch names onto headstones, and in Irish Catholic culture we have All Saints' Day, which is the 2nd of November, where we go and visit the graves of our past generations, and it's sort of ritualistic. We bring flowers, sometimes we bring plants. But the agenda, even though whether you're a believer or not a believer, the agenda is that you're actually investing in a resurrection, a future of immortality. And I think that's, it's very deeply ingrained in how we feel and how we believe. There's an ancient Gaelic text, style of text called Ogham. It's called Ogham stones. It's predominantly on stones, but it used to be on more perishable substances before. But what's left is stones. They basically, there's I think about 400 of them standing now at the moment, right? And they're about 8 foot tall. And down the edge there are letters. The letters are actually parallel lines. And every Ogham stone, without fail, it records a name. And I think that's interesting. This is from the 4th century, and some people say from 100 years, like BC. Some of these stones, even though it's 2,000 years ago, in their local townlands, people identify exactly who that person is. They know what battle he died and where he's buried. It may not even be true, but there's a collective, I suppose, memory. And I think that what I'm actually getting at is that maybe that is why the storyteller, the question I posed earlier, right, that's why the storyteller is held with such reverence and such high esteem in our culture, because the storyteller, and this isn't about me, but it sort of is, but the storyteller is the keeper of the flame. And like in a secular sort of way, the storyteller can give a level of immortality to not just fictional characters, but to an era. You read about Dickens, you read Joyce, you even read Filth by Irving Welsh or whatever. Like any era can live on in immortality on the strength of the storyteller. And I suppose that's it. It creates an immortality, and I think it's probably sad it may seem, but sometimes the storyteller becomes more important than the story they tell. What I'm going to do very briefly, I'm going to read a very short extract, and then I will be finished. Woohoo! So basically, this is the very last page of my novel called Passion Play. Passion Play is 25 years old, believe it or not, this week. It's just one of those novels that just keeps generating interest in my little life, and people around me continually come back to me about it. And I suppose, but anyway, the point is that it's a tragic story. It's the story of a man who takes his own life on Good Friday. His name is Pluto, Paul O'Toole. And as you know, Pluto is the god of the underworld, as opposed to Jesus, who's, it's Good Friday. He's facing eviction from a kip of a bedsit. His life has really been terrible. The woman he loved ditched him years ago. As he says, he got married in a fever on a fiver, and his life was just hell. Facing eviction, he takes his life. But before he takes his life, he has very little in the flat. It's a kip for bedsit, but he happens to have 2 hits of LSD. So he takes them as well. And even though his body is dead on the floor, his mind takes off on a journey of redemption back through his life. It's a kaleidoscopic journey. It's a hallucinogenic journey, but it brings him back. And I suppose the point, if there is a thesis in this book, the thesis is that heaven and hell, good and bad, happy and sad, they're actually just 2 sides of the same coin, and it's all about perception and perspective. And this is it. He doesn't realize he's dead. Everybody in the book knows he's dead because they're all dead. But he meets this woman, and he can't believe they're getting on so well. So they walk past my house, because everything I write is based on my street. He walks past my house, and then he turns left up Patrick's Hill, and this is where he is. I take Yvette by the hand, and on, we make our way to the brow of Patrick's Hill. There we stop. We look back down into the goldfish bowl. We don't turn to salt. Yvette, she takes my hand and leads the way. We climb the wall at Bell's Field. There before us is a world framed by the salt and pepper cellars, the belfries of St. Anne's and the North Cathedral. My eyes embrace the beautiful north side laid out before us like a kitchen table at Christmas time, cram-packed with dainties and delights, stretching as far as the eye can see, vanishing over the hill at Blarney Street and Knocknaheeny. Breathe it in, I say. We walk through the knee-high meadow, nestled down into a sheltered hollow. We're sprawled there, barefoot on a grassy ridge above the city, saying nothing. Bolts of pleasure and pain as my memories travel across Brewery Valley, stopping off along the way at North Monastery, Eason's Hill, Murphy's Stack, landlocked Powell-Raddy Harbour, past each laneway step and steeple, from the Bishop's Palace right over to the dome of City Hall, then all the way back to Redemption Road and over the city to the spiked towers of Holy Trinity, St. Finbarr's and the green tops of St. Francis. In the distance, the county hall scrapes clouds, picking up the gold of a dying sun. I glaze out westward, out along the beautiful Lee Valley to the Carrigahan Strait. There, like a last grasp at life, a setting sun sends flames of reds and orange and yellow licking high up into the sky. Looks like Ballincollig's burning. My city is a royal town, dressed up in crimson and gold. In the distance, through the mists of time and coal smoke, I hear the cry of an echo boy, the sound of men walking and whistling their way home from work to the red city of Granabraher, the chimes of an ice cream van across on Spangle Hill, the bells of some cathedral or other at the yelps of children from Roach's buildings playing ball along the road. And as I say goodbye to the city of pain, it occurs to me that there is a harmony of movement and colour and sound. Everything is as one. The aromatic blending of Murphy's Brewery, Linehan's Sweet Factory, Donnelly's Bakery. Yvette, she snuggles into me. Jesus, this could be heaven, I whisper. Could be, she smiles. Could be. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cónal, for delighting us with your stories and inspiring us to think. Thank you. The interdisciplinary jury of the World Cultural Council comprises more than 200 distinguished personalities from 35 countries representing science, education, and arts. This esteemed group has selected Eske Willerslev, Professor of Evolutionary Biology at the University of Copenhagen, and Prince Philip Professor at the University of Cambridge, as the winner of the Albert Einstein World Award of Science for 2024. Professor Willerslev is credited with establishing the field of environmental DNA as a revolutionary means of understanding ourselves as humans and the world surrounding us. He and his collaborators have shown that our species has been mobile as far back as we can track human history, and that the world we know today, with populations located in specific geographical areas, is, for the most part, very recent. We as humans are all closely related and share a common past and history. His broad scientific impact forces us to rethink the origins and evolution of human groups, languages, and behavior. His discoveries have influenced how scientists approach indigenous communities. He has respectfully worked alongside indigenous peoples on several continents, and his findings have resulted in the repatriation of various human remains to their rightful descendants. He has written popular books and articles to bring modern science to lay audiences. In short, he is a true ambassador for modern science. Eske.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor for me to give this lecture, and of course it's a great honor to receive the Albert Einstein Award. So thank you very much. I want to use this opportunity to also tell you a story, but it will be a very different story from the one you heard from Colin. I thought I would give you the story of how we discovered environmental DNA back in the day, and also how that led us to uncover what, at least at this stage, is the oldest DNA recovered so far. So it goes back to my young years. So when I was young, I was a bad student. I was actually doing very poorly in school, and you can say no one thought, I didn't think I would ever be a researcher or professor, and my teachers definitely never thought that either. My passion at that time was to be an adventurer, an explorer, and a fur trapper. And so this is what I did in my late teens and my early 20s. I went to Siberia, northeastern Siberia, the first time at the time when it was still Soviet Union. Actually came in the Soviet Union and left Russia, because there was a breakdown while I was out in the wilderness. Hadn't heard about it out there. And then finally, you can say I stayed a season as a fur trapper in Siberia, which is, the coldest area on Earth where humans are living naturally. And when I came back from this fur trapping experience, and I had realized, I'm not only a bad student, I'm also a tremendously bad trapper. So it wasn't really, you can say, the future that I thought it would be. And I was in, you can say, kind of in a life crisis. What should I do with my life? I wasn't good at school, and my dream of becoming an explorer and trapper was falling to the ground. And I started, studying at the university biology because, as your parents says, you have to have an education, you have to have some kind of safety to return on. And I really disliked going to university, and the reason being that, both university but also other schools, because we always learned about what other people have done, right? I don't know if you remember that yourself. You're reading about the achievements of other people's. Pretty boring, right? It's not you who's doing it. And then when you do experiments, right? I'm sure most of you here have done it, right? You do experiments that thousands of people have done before you. I mean, you know the result already, right? I mean, why doing the experiment in the first place? And so I found it tremendously boring, but all this changed when I did my master project, because when you do your master, that's the first time where you're allowed to basically ask a question yourself you want to address, right? And you have to create an experiment trying to address this question. And for me, I wanted to do ancient DNA. There was no ancient DNA laboratory in Denmark where I did my master. And the field was in a great crisis at this time. This was the late 90s. It had turned out, people had all kinds of claims of DNA surviving tens of millions of years in amber and tumbid insect, dinosaur bones, and magnolia leaves, and it all turned out to be contamination. I mean, false positive results. Super embarrassing, right? Published in Nature and Science, and it was all wrong, right? So that was when I entered, and I said, I want to do this anyways. And, my supervisor said, this is a very, very dodgy path to take, but, whatever. But, of course, I wasn't famous, and nobody knew who I was, so I couldn't get bones, right? People obtained DNA from bones and teeth, and I couldn't get any bones and teeth that was of any value. And I met this old professor, and he said, what about looking at ice cores, DNA in ice cores? And it was actually quite a clever idea because, these ice cores that are drilled from Antarctica and Greenland, right? What is ice, glacial ice? It's actually snow that has been falling down from the sky over time, and then under pressure it turns into ice, right? And his thought was, well, maybe, microbes are falling down together with the snow, and you can then use the ice cores to reconstruct microbial diversity. So me and my master, I did a master together with another guy called Anders Hansen. Well, we used 2 years to try to get DNA out of ice cores, right? 2 years of hard work. And our master project actually became, we showed for 2 ice core samples that you could get DNA out of fungi and algae that had fallen down, right? And it got published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which was, for a master project, a pretty good journal, right, to get into. And for me, this was the moment where I just knew I wanted to become a scientist, because those of you who are scientists, I'm sure you can resonate with this, right? But that you make a discovery, it might be quite small, but it's changing the way we're looking at something, right? Maybe a little bit, maybe not very much, but a little bit. And it's you who did it, right? It's not somebody else you read about in a book. It's actually you who did it. And it was the first time anybody had ever obtained DNA from ice cores. And then the problem was, at that time in Denmark, there was very little money for science at that point. That has changed now, fortunately, but because of Novo Nordic. So I couldn't, even though it was published in this journal, and I got a very fine mark and all that, I couldn't get money for a PhD. Right? There was no money for a PhD, so I had to wait 1.5 years. And what happened? Well, there was a group in the US, a group in France, a group in Russia, of course took up, now your paper is out, right? So they were running with this ice core genetics, and when the money finally came in after 1.5 years, well, you had lost the competition, right? It was gone. So science is also about this, right? It's about getting funding at the right time. So I had to come up with something else. Now we had the money, but the idea was gone, right? And I was still not famous enough that anybody would give me important bones or teeth, right? So I had to think, I thought, well, I have to come up with something that is material, that there's tons of, that no one cares about, right? So, and I thought, what could that be? And then one autumn, just like now, really, I'm standing looking out of the window, right? And I see this woman coming walking with her dog on the street, and the dog takes a crap on the street. And at the same time, you see the leaves just like now, right? They're falling down right from the trees, hitting the ground. And suddenly it hit me, well, we know there's DNA in the dog poop, right? Because it has come through the intestines. We know there's DNA in the leaf, right? But we also know after it's rained next time, the dog poop is gone, right? And after a few years, the leaves are gone. We know that. What I ask myself is, what happens to the DNA? Could the DNA actually be preserved in the sediments somehow? So I went to my supervisor and said, well, what do you think about this idea that we could look for plant and animal DNA directly in sediments? And he said, I never heard anything as stupid in my life. And that because the notion was that DNA is very unstable, and of course it will be degraded. We all knew that there was a lot of bacteria in the soil. That was not a problem, but they are living, right? But that dead things could survive in the soil without being degraded or chewed up with bacteria was just ridiculous. That was the thought. But luckily, you can say sometimes you should, if you think you have a good idea, well, you have to stick with it, right? So I said, well, okay, maybe it's stupid, but I want to test it off. And then I thought, well, if this should work, where should it work? Well, we know that, well, we have a chemist here, right? We know, at least that's what I learned in school, that if you have low temperatures, chemical reactions happen slower, right? So it means if you go to soil which is cold or very frozen, like permafrost, right? I mean, if it's not working there, it shouldn't work anywhere, right? At least it should work there if there's any reason in this. So I actually contacted, from my days as a fur trapper and explorer, a Russian geologist who was working in those regions, and he came to Copenhagen bringing these permafrost samples with him. And first I thought, well, you have to, of course, what's the chance of an animal in the past taking a poo exactly here, 20,000 years ago? thought, well, it's probably quite small, right? After all. So I thought we would need to have huge amounts of soil, right? But all DNA, when you extract DNA, this is all based on DNA extraction from bacteria, right? And fungi, where you have millions, in a gram of soil. So all extraction methods was based on these tiny amounts of soil. So at first I tried to freeze dry the soil to see if I could reduce the volume, and it didn't work at all. And in the end, we just took, basically, half a gram of soil, right? Of this permafrost, put it into a tube, extracted it. And I remember, and then we cloned it into bacteria. That's the way we did it back then. Now it's much more sophisticated, but in order to separate it out. And then you can compare it, to all known DNA sequences. But this happened, I remember, Christmas Day, right? So everybody had left for Christmas, the lab. So I was sitting there alone, and we got these sequences back, right? And then you take your computer, and then you blast them, right? You compare them to all known DNA sequences in the world. And so then it just came out: woolly mammoth, bison, reindeer, lemmings, hares, enormous amount of plants. I mean, you basically reconstructed major parts of the ecosystem from half a gram of soil, right? And I was like, this is crazy, right? So what we got samples sent from New Zealand, which is unfrozen, from caves, right, in New Zealand, and did the same thing. And there the DNA came out of the moa birds, the extinct moa birds, the flightless birds that lived in New Zealand before. And of course, at that point, we knew, well, this is a winner. Then I took soil from, surface soil, modern soil, right, where you could identify, using classical methods, you could identify what plants are living in this fraction of the soil. And you took soil out, sequenced it, and matched it to these plants that were living, right? And it matched, right? So it was beautiful. It was incredible. But the crazy thing is, well, now we got these, and we published it in Science and back in 2003. But scientists are very conservative people. And nobody paid attention to it. It was an amazing result, right? You could reconstruct entire ecosystems from a piece of bloody dirt, right? From the past. What people have used so far at this point, pollen diagrams that you find over here to the plants, and then you find, maybe if you're lucky, a bone over here, and then you try to connect the two and say, well, I think that mammoth had something to do with the plants I find 200 kilometers away, right? Here you had the whole ecosystem. Though the DNA you found in that soil sample, all those animals are together with those plants, with those microbes, with those whatever, at that time, at that spot in time, which is pretty remarkable thing. But people didn't pay attention. And nevertheless, I could stand here saying how exciting it was. And it's quite interesting because, well, I was, I think, more or less the only one working on this for the next 10 years. And then suddenly there was a quite famous ecologist, French ecologist, Pierre Tabellet, who actually kind of took notice of it. And then he named it. He named it environmental DNA. And suddenly it exploded. So science is also about, I guess you can say branding or whatever you would call it, right? I had never thought about that. Well, science is science, right? But branding names and that kind of stuff. But that's also very important. Anyways, so then it took off, and now, of course, people have looked at this environmental DNA, and you find it all over the place, right? So you find it, if you go and take a water sample from a lake, right? You can reconstruct not only what is in the lake, of fish, etc. If it's a smaller lake, you also can reconstruct what is living outside the lake. It's flowing in the DNA. It's incredible. Even you can find, if you have like a small lake, you can find the DNA of the deer that either were drinking in this lake or were swimming in it, right? If you go and do it in the ocean as well, you can find out what fish are there. We have done experiments where we have had divers going into the ocean, right? Monitoring what kind of fish are there after we took the sample. And we find all the same fish as well as some that the divers never saw, right? So it's a very powerful, and today it's used for biodiversity monitoring in all kinds of settings, and it's you can say you find it in ice, and even in air, in all kinds of places. But what I want to get to here is, of course, we used it to look at megafauna extinctions, the early peopling of the Americas, what routes did they take, and so forth. But 3 years after the discovery, in 2006, I went on an expedition up to Peary Land in northern Greenland. And the purpose was something very different. It was to find out who were the first peoples settling the Arctic. And Peary Land, I mean, next stop is the North Pole. It's a very unpleasant place. I mean, there's stone and ice, polar bear and muskox, and that's basically it. It's like a barren ground, right? It's what you call an Arctic desert. It's like Sahara, just in the Arctic. So I was running around up there trying to find remains from human sites. You can find them on the surface, and there's no people there whatsoever. There's nobody living there. And on the expedition was a geologist. His name is Sven Funder, and he had discovered back in the 70s a site up there called the Cap Copenhagen Formation. And this is a remarkable site. I mean, huge hills of dirt. And these samples of dirt survived the last glaciation. So they're actually dating back to before the last glaciation. So they are between 2 and 2.4 million years old. And, at this time, the general notion in the ancient DNA community, after all these failures with dinosaur DNA and all that, right? People had actually made calculations based on DNA degradation of DNA molecules in water solutions. It was work by Thomas Lindahl, among others. And you could kind of calculate, well, the oldest DNA that you could ever find in Earth would be around 1 million years. That's it, right? No older than this. And we were then landing on this Cap Copenhagen Formation, which is between 2 and 2.4 million, right? And you're up there, right? You're not getting up there anytime soon, right? So you take whatever you have. So I took some samples from the Cap Copenhagen Formation of dirt and brought back to Copenhagen. And we tried to get DNA out of it. We failed. And it was kind of, okay, well, it fits at least the theoretical predictions of ancient DNA survival, right? And every time in my lab, when there was a technological innovation of some kind, we always took the Cap Copenhagen Formation samples and tried, and they always failed, and they got the name, the curse of the Cap Copenhagen Formation, because everybody who touched it actually left signs afterwards, discouraged. But then, a few years ago, we had the breakthrough after many, many years of trying. And it was a combination of really two things, right? One was the invasion of what we call next generation sequencing, right? Where it allows you to get very, very short fragments of DNA. DNA gets fragmented over time, and it allows you to get a lot of it, right? In a very short time period. And then it also, because we learned that DNA is binding to sediment particles. The dirt DNA, the environmental DNA, is actually, when it's free in the soil, it's binding to mineral particles, because mineral particles are electrically charged, and DNA is also electrically charged. And some mineral particles are binding DNA way, way better than others, right? So we could in our group there's a woman, Karina, who could do experiments showing if we know the composition of minerals in the Cap Copenhagen Formation, where will the DNA be binding, right? And then you can go directly and target those places, right? So that combination really made it possible to retrieve this DNA that is 2.4 million years. And it was a complete eye-opener. This environment that today is an Arctic desert, there's nothing there. 2.4 million years just before the glaciation formations, the last ice age, right? It's the last warm period on Earth. It was a diverse forest. There was spruce, pine, larix trees, tuya, and there was the only thing you have found in terms of animal remains from this site was a piece of a dung beetle. That's these beetles, you see in Africa today that are pushing dung around from bigger animals, and then a hair tooth. That was it. And we find, of course, both the dung beetle, the hair, we find ants, they're not even existing in Greenland at all. Today, we find the ancestor of reindeer, goose, and then we found, to our great surprise, mastodons, right? Mastodons are these huge extinct elephants that are living in, you can say, in the US or lived in the US. It's related to the woolly mammoth, right? And so it was a world completely different to what we know of today. But not only was it different, it has no modern day analog. So it's a mixture of species that we today associate with the Arctic, together with species that is today associated with the temperate zone, in a combination that you don't see anywhere today in the world. So what could we learn from this? Besides, well, it's exciting. We could go back to before the last ice age for the first time and look at the molecular biology. Well, this result, together with many other environmental DNA results we have got, tells us that when you have climatic changes, right, when things were warmer, back then the temperature was 15 degrees Celsius warmer in northern Greenland. Every time you see these shifts, right, where it's getting warmer, nature responds in different ways. It's not like, well, now we are returning, as we are facing now, global warming, right? And then we will get the same as what we saw before it was warm the last time. It's the same with the cold. So every time you have these kind of cycles, climatic changes, you can say there's, of course, a response by nature, right? Nature is responding, but it's actually not the same response. So what does it tell us? Well, the bad news here is it tells us it's actually super unpredictable what will happen, right? Because of global warming. So it's not enough that what people basically have done so far, where they sit looking at the niche of a certain species and then say, well, the temperature is changing like this, well, we move it up here, right? It's not how it works. It's way more complicated. Things are getting together that was not previous together. So that's the bad news about this. And of course, you can say, if you don't know what to expect, well, it's also pretty hard to mitigate it, right? In any timely manner. The good news, however, is, well, we know that nature is responding. We know that nature has been responding, and we know, of course, because of Charles Darwin, we know, well, species are responding through mutations, adaptive mutations, right? And we know from the environmental DNA work that new organisms and species are getting together in new ways, right? So nothing is as efficient, you can say, as nature in responding to climate change. And the environmental DNA record holds the blueprint for this change, right? So if we can go back, you just imagine, if you go back in different time periods, right? Different time slices and uncover the environmental DNA record, right? You can actually get a toolbox from the DNA of what is possible adaptive changes. And those adaptive changes, whether it's organismal compositions or whether it's mutations, genetic adaptive variants, you can, of course, play, if you want, try to incorporate that into existing species to make them more climate sustainable. And this is what we are trying to do now. So we are facing a food crisis in the world because of climate change, right? So we have generated these monocultures of food, right, of crops, and you can say, well, the problem is we have kind of favored, you can say, output over everything else, right? So we have said, okay, we would just give them enough fertilizer and pesticides and water. Well, then it's fine, right? They can grow. The problem is it's not working anymore. It hasn't worked, you can say, in terms of pollution and biodiversity, it hasn't worked for a long time. But even if we take that aside, it's actually not working anymore because the crops can't handle these climatic changes that are happening, right? So the question is, how can we get around this, right? If we don't handle it, people will starve, right? So it's pretty serious. And well, what our approach, we'll see how it works. We've just started. But it is to say, okay, let's use nature's own solutions, right? Through the environmental record from different time points, different types of climates of the past. And then breed these things into the crops, as well as getting the microorganisms that you see in these systems, or also other plants, into the ecosystems around the crops, and try to make more sustainable food sources this way. And I believe in it. Well, we'll see. The reviewers didn't, but we got the money anyways. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's it for me. Thank you very much for your attention. Yeah.
Hello again. Congratulations to both of you. Thank you very much for both your presentations. Unfortunately, as we always say, this is way too long, or too short a segment that we have together. So it's going to be quite a quick one once I've sorted out this mic. No, it wants to get away. Okay, if somebody knows how to do this better, that would be helpful. Tom? Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, I'll just hold it. It's fine. I'm not sure why it's not typing. Aha. I have it, Tom. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is Tom Howell, everyone. Our producer, CBC Ideas. It's wonderful to meet you both. Thank you very much for agreeing to speak with us. The two of you, of course, come from very different worlds, the arts and the sciences. And I want to try just to start off by bringing those two worlds together. So, Eske, I'd like to start with you. What do you consider to be the most artistic part of what you do?
Well, I mean, I think for me, science is a very creative process. And it's actually what I love about it. You know, if I shouldn't have been a scientist, I would probably have tried my luck with the arts instead. And I think when I talk to my colleagues, this is often what I hear, you know, that they would have tried to be writers, painters or something. So I think it is kind of the same mindset, really. So even though you can say it's expressed in different ways, I actually think we are quite similar.
Oh, yeah. I'd like to hear more about that. Yeah. But first, Cónal, if I can ask you, anything scientific about what you do?
Not particularly, I would say. But what I will say is I remember coming across Eske's work and reading up about when this whole thing came together, and I found it fascinating that one of the things he said. Yeah. One of the things that he said was that his imagination was his salvation. And truthfully, for me as a writer, I wouldn't see myself as a writer because it's I think it's a very lofty position. But at the time, thinking that that was my salvation too, creativity. So if that's a link, I don't know, but you know.
Well, let's delve into imagination because it is a large part. I mean, you write both nonfiction and fiction. Yeah. Imagination is required for both. Can you speak to just how much imagination plays a role in what you do? Well,
I always think that my best fiction is in my memoir, and my best factual stuff is in my fiction. You know, I find that when I read back some of my fiction, I think I know exactly what's happening there. Whereas, you know, so yeah.
Eske, could you speak to how much imagination played into the success of the work that you do?
Well, for me, it's extremely important. It's interesting that, I mean, I always, when we start something, I imagine, you know, it comes from an imagination of something. I have to be honest and say very often my imagination turns out to be false. It's actually the norm. And this is how, I guess, science works, right? It's where you start something because you have an idea that maybe it will show this or show something like that. And then I would say 95% of the time, you know, I'm actually wrong. It shows something different. But you can say where I have been fairly good of getting it is to hit the right overall field. I mean, so the imagination was correct on the really broad scale. It's just my details were terribly wrong in my predictions. So, but it is, that's how I work. I work by imagining, the worlds, or how I kind of see it as a picture out there, more or less blurry, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
I suppose part of the imagination led you to the belief that there's a frontier, as you called it, that has not been discovered and that it hadn't been mapped. And so, Cónal, at the risk of asking you a question that's maybe outside the scope of this conversation, is there a frontier in your work that you think that hasn't been mapped that you'd like to still tackle?
I think every day, like every time I start writing something new, or even something when I pick up something that I've been working on for a long time, it always seems brand new to me, and I always don't even trust that it's going to be any good. I'm not talking for a public, but for myself, that I won't be. So every day is a new frontier. But can I just say something, sit down a sidebar? Yeah. I think you're an incredible teacher. Honestly, I would listen to you forever, and for something,
right?
You too, mate.
Something that is, predictably a very complicated subject matter. It's like I'm right in there with you, and I think incredible. You have an amazing knack. There you are, my friend.
Wonderful. How do you manage, Cónal, the relationship between the irrational and the rational parts of your brain?
Well, the irrational wins every time, That's the truth of it. The rational side, I haven't found it yet, and God knows I've been looking for it. The truth is that everything I write is about my little street, and it came about, I think, because I opened a laundrette in the mid-'80s, and my view of the world was through the width of a door onto my street, and it was pure frustration. And I think that's so. I think my creative practice is irrational because of that, because it's very narrow, and yet because of that it's very wide, because it digs deeper. It's like your DNA, it gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and well, it's not the intention, but I think it might expose more than a big broad pit, canvas.
Eske, the same question: the irrational and the irrational, how do they play in what you do in science?
Try to be rational, right? but I'm not sure how well it goes. I mean, it's for me, it's about you can say you get ideas, right, and you test your ideas, and some of them pays off. Some of them I see it as I'm putting out 20 ships, right, and 10 of them are sinking, right? 5 are coming into shore, really. And then there's a few maybe that land, and it's super nice. So that's how it works, right? I mean, as a scientist, you go with your data, right? That's how it is. So you can say it's the idea, that's the creative part, and how you try to test your idea can be a very creative part. But after that, you can say it becomes a matter of getting data and then see what the data shows, right? And
I guess your career speaks to how important the gut, though, is in following your gut in science.
Yeah. I mean, yes. Yes. I mean, for me, that's how it works. Okay. I think people do it very differently. I mean, there's some of my colleagues that are thinking of it very differently, right? Some of them see it's like there's a need for this, for example, in the community. Where is the need? And then they think about how can I address the need, right? Yeah. I always have gone with kind of, well, I think this is fascinating. Well, I hope somebody else thinks that too, kind of.
Eske, just staying with you for one more second. Yeah. Cónal in his lecture said that everyone is presenting a narrative. I'm wondering if you could speak to whether you are a storyteller as well, or whether you're more of a story seeker.
Well, it's difficult, these questions you're coming with.
In 20 minutes or less.
Yeah, no. Is it over soon?
No, we're good. Yeah.
Well, I think it's both, really, right? I mean, I think I'm seeking stories, right? Because of course, what you want when you work with the past as a scientist, you try to reconstruct the past as good as you can. right? That's the aim. You will never probably end up doing it exactly how it was, but we believe we are getting closer and closer, right, to do these reconstructions, and that's kind of your aim, and there you are searching for the truth, I would say, right, for what happened. Then when you get the results, and when you go to a scene like this here, for example, right, then it becomes, of course you want to tell people about what you found and this truth, but it also becomes a storytelling, right? I mean, you saw that, well, then I talk about my failed childhood or whatever it was, right, try to make it interesting, right? So it's part of the storytelling, right? Yeah. So it's, I guess it's both, right? Yeah.
And Cónal, just as a follow-up to what you were saying about how we're all engaged in entertainment, we're all performing at all times of day and night, I just wonder if you could speak to what's most important to you when you think about the nature of the entertainment that you're giving people.
Well, truthfully, the most important thing, I think it has to be engagement with, it has nothing to do with what I do, really. It has to do with engaging with people. Mm-hmm. And it's a real thing. I grew up in a little shop, and there was 12 children in the house, and my mother comes from a family of 10 children, and my cousins, my Uncle John has 14 children, so people are really important. Yeah. And our little shop, it was certainly the way it was back then, it was more social than commercial. People would stand there talking. And what for myself personally, I did learn from a very young age that anybody who had a good story, and it mightn't be an epic, but could turn that whole thing of I went downtown to get a bottle of milk and you'll never guess what happened. That kind of epic could hold the floor for, and I'm only guessing because I don't know, but as a small kid, I'm sure I saw that there's value in that. And I think when you live in a house with 12 children and 12 brothers and sisters and 2 aunts and there's 20 of you in this house, finding that people will listen to you is probably important. Maybe. I mean, that's me being a psychiatrist myself. I should be charging myself for this. It's like counselling. How much do I owe myself? No, but seriously.
But staying in sort of in the chair, so to speak, you called yourself once an accidental author.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
Well, because really, well, 2 things. First of all, in Irish culture, writers are held in huge high esteem, and I certainly was very slow, and I still am slow and reticent enough to put myself into that ring, you know. And then I actually got into writing purely by default, because truthfully, you know, you can imagine that household, small shop, small kitchen, 20 people, cats, dogs, the whole lot, a shop open all day long. It wasn't the kind of house where people were sitting around reading books, but it was a newsagent's, and we were all reading very, very young. We were reading, like, from a very young age. And I never really saw myself as a writer, and I found that whole transition where people might call you a writer, I found that difficult enough. So I suppose that's why I call myself an accidental author, because I never wrote for publication. I just wrote because I wanted to write, you know.
Yeah. Eske, again, I'm looking for common themes here, but the beginning of your lecture, you really underlined how you might have also been an accidental scientist. What do you say to young people who may not have decided whether science is where they're going, about just how likely it might be that they might fall into it?
Yeah, no, this is actually something I mean, when I do scientific communication, you can say my aim very early on was to try to reach groups of young people that are not the ones that normally goes into science. So actually, there's been interviews with me in porno magazines, for example, you know, where you have a naked woman on one side and then you have an interview with me on science on the other, right? So it was a way to, because I think you can say, well, there's certain people, we all know them from school, right, that are kind of destined to become a scientist, right? They like sitting, you know, doing the chemistry, and they like all this, and those will come in and probably will go into to science anyways, right? They will go by themselves. Then the question is there another group of people, right, that might get in there if you can offer them something different, And I would have been one of those people, right? Where you can say, for me, it's not this about sitting mingling that with something which is what drives me. To me, it's the result, right? It's the discovery. And that's the adventure part of it, right? It is about going to work. If you imagine you're coming into work, the results have come back, right? You see them, and they are nothing like you expected. And they're changing the way we look at something. I mean, for me, this is something, it's the most valuable part of my work. I mean, I can't describe the joy I have in that moment, right? So all the rest, some of it like this and so forth is great, and fine publications and all that, but nothing beats the discovery. And I think, personally, that there's young people out there, I'm sure like myself, that would be driven by that part, right? But that are not exposed to that part in school because you're sitting doing these experiments that 100,000 young people have done before you, right? So I think, so I'm trying to reach that group, and also with my popular books and stuff, I'm trying to show that science is an adventure. It's an adventure. It's the modern day, it's the modern day explorers, right? It's scientists. Yeah.
There was applause coming. Go ahead.
I hope some of you agree.
Just a couple more quick things, but you hit the next question quite closely, which is the importance of storytelling in science, and the fact that it is as important as, well, maybe not exactly as important, but relatively important in the telling the story of science. Can you talk about how much time you spend on storytelling as opposed to gathering and processing data?
Well, I mean, the storytelling, you can say, I guess it differs from Cónal's world that there's certain parts of the scientific story that is kind of fixed, right? That's the difference. So you have some results. Well, those are fixed, right? They show something that is kind of fixed. So where you have some room to think is, of course, the context of these results, right? So you can tell a story, a scientific story, which are, we heard from Omar, his lecture, fantastic lecture, I have to say, about, his chemistry work, right? And you can say, yes, there's these molecules with strong bonds he's creating. And yes, if you're a chemist, you would sitting like, oh my God, how exciting. But what makes it exciting for the rest of people is its implications, right? For CO2 capture, for water capture, etc. And of course, so it's about the context you're setting for your findings. So even your findings are fixed. It's also what do you imagine these findings can be used for, right? Yeah. That creates a story.
Yeah. Cónal, just near the end here, you started the conversation with your lecture talking about measuring success. And you've had many accolades, including the one you're being awarded with tomorrow. Your book that you read from is one of the most borrowed, if I broke a record, I think it would be one of the most borrowed books of fiction in the library. Yeah. Could you just talk about how you actually do measure success? What is for you success?
Well, realistically, and this sounds like it's made up, but truthfully, what drew me to writing at the beginning was that whole thing of being able to sit down and put one word after another, not the physical ability, but that headspace. And in fact, when I had the laundrette, it got very busy for me very rapidly because I started writing radio drama, and I got a feeling I'd probably written more radio drama than probably anybody in the world, about 80 hours of it, right? And I used to write a half-an-hour drama every single week. So I moved from my laundrette into the car outside the laundrette, and I was writing there. And at that moment, that is when I'm happiest, And there's that sort of feeling. Sometimes it's not really, it's hard to quantify it, but basically life gets in the way of it. That's the truth of it. And I often see that it's a bit like an obsessive-compulsive, I won't say disorder, but it's an obsessive-compulsive order in my life that I just want to do this and everything else gets in the way. But that's okay too, because you need that sort of balance of, because there's another part of me that loves socializing. So I really love being on my own, and I love being with people. It causes a big crisis for me, really, to tell you the truth, you know.
Imagine.
Success is to be able to be on my own with a crowd of people around me and writing. Never happens, you know. I'm not successful.
I wish you that one day. Last question for both of you. There's an Australian art critic named Robert Hughes who said, "The greater the artist, the greater the doubt." And I wondered, you know, maybe if it applies to scientists as well, and I imagine for writers. So what would you point to, both of you, as the most important doubts that fuel your work? Eske first, and then Cónal.
Well, I mean, for me, I'm trying to change the field, take a very strong change in direction of my research approximately every 10 years, right? I'm not that old, but I've done it a few times. And I would say at that stage, it's quite, you can say, scary, because you need to make a decision, right, where you are turning your whole lab from one focus to another focus, right? And if you get it wrong, right, it's actually really bad, right? And it's not only bad for you; it's actually bad for a lot of people, right? So it's a really big decision making, and that's where you can say it's not about a detailed study. It's about, you know, moving into a new field, right? But I have to do it because it's. People work in different ways. I always are working best in what you can say in the pioneer phase, where there's, you know, where you know very little about something, and where you can say where everything you find out are kind of super exciting because nobody knew anything, right, to start with. But of course, a pioneer phase never lasts, right? At some point, it becomes a non-pioneer and a red ocean, and then that's when I'm shifting. And in those times, I definitely have doubt. I would say, yeah.
Cónal, last word on how doubt fuels you.
Well, Omar said very sweet things about me earlier, and successes and all that. And the odd thing, and I'm not being falsely humble here, right? The reality is, my failures have been a lot more spectacular than my successes, and that is the truth. And the mad thing is, I often think that I'm actually a lot more comfortable with failure, because as much and as delighted as I was when the WCC and Lily Hernandez phoned me, it made me doubt myself, actually, you know, and I almost felt like saying, not that you've made a mistake here, it was, you've made a big mistake here. No. But no, the reality is, so I doubt everything, actually, you know, and I don't think that has anything to do with being creative. I think it's just the way my head works, you know, because at the end of the day, I love what I'm doing, I'm very confident what I do, but not to a public. I like myself what I do, but I always feel, who wants to read this rubbish, you know, but that's the way.
Apparently a lot of people. Yeah. Congratulations to both of you.
Thank
you very, very much for taking my questions. Ladies and gentlemen, Cónal Creedon and Eske Willerslev. Thank you. A really big thank you to all of you for being here this evening. And now to wrap up, McGill's Vice President in charge of Research and Innovation, please welcome to the stage Dominique Berube for tonight's closing remarks.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Again, a bit of a sad moment after listening to our lecturers. I have that role to close the lecture tonight. So thank you to start with. Thank you, Nala, for taking that challenge of that integrative discussion. Well done, and definitely your participation made a real difference in that discussion. Thank you very much. Of course, Mr. Creedon and Professor Willerslev, your shared passion for creativity, for for life, for discovery through storytelling and, of course, scientific discovery, has really brought to us some new understanding of the world around us. And I think we're going to all be looking with brand new eyes when we look around us tonight. So thank you for your captivating talks. And please join me in giving one last round of applause to our Beatty lecturers tonight. Thank you. So just a few thanks again. So the Beatty Lecture is organized by, of course, Research and Innovation in collaboration with University Advancements and uniquely this year, the World Cultural Council. So I wish, of course, to thank the World Cultural Council for their partnership. And this event would not be possible every year with the dedication of many people, as you can imagine, across the university, including the communication team, the Schulich School of Music, and McGill's multimedia team. So finally, thank you all for attending tonight, including those that are tuning in to the live stream from near and far. We'll be sure to maybe listen again to the CBC summary of that. So je vous souhaite à tous une excellente soirée et de belles réflexions pour le reste de la soirée. Merci.